Hey parents, Carmine here with your video review of Resident Evil 6. Resident Evil 6 is one of the most schizophrenic games I've ever played. 4 campaigns, 7 main characters, 2 different types of common enemies. In one campaign you're fighting zombies, in another you're fighting mutated people. Some enemies use weapons and behave like a ragtag army. Other enemies slowly lumber towards you, absorbing bullets like a sponge absorbs water. Each character has a different design for its user interface, which makes finding most buttons difficult for the first few minutes of play with a new character. It really seems like 3 different guys decided to write separate stories and then loosely tie them together with one final short epilogue. Violence in this game will vary depending on the campaign, enemy type, and situation, but it will almost always involve copious amounts of blood and gore. Ammunition will be scarce for players early on, so headshots are almost always required against all enemy types. Headshots from all weapon types will eventually result in a destroyed skull and brain tissue exploding from the head. Since destroying the head of an enemy is the fastest and most efficient way of killing enemies, this will be the most common method of execution the player will use. Most zombies will also lose chunks if they're shot in the limbs or torso, but the humanoid monsters will not. All enemies will quickly dissolve into ashes after death. The player does have access to other weapons, but the standard pistols, shotguns, and assault rifles will be the most common. Excluding those, the player can use grenades and C4 packs. Explosions will completely obliterate most common enemy types, resulting in a shower of blood and gore. Incendiary grenades will light all enemies in a group on fire, most of whom will melt into a puddle and disappear. These types of weapons are extremely useful for taking out large groups of weaker enemies, so the player will use them a couple of times over each campaign. There are a number of times when the violence level increases, but specific examples vary from campaign to campaign. One enemy type has a chainsaw for a hand, which he can drive straight through the player's abdomen if he gets too close. Another enemy will grab the player, jump on him, and proceed to suck the player's brain tissue out of his face, with corresponding blood and gore. Most of these zombies will have blood and chunks of flesh dripping from their mouths or wounds. There are dozens of different examples the player will encounter over each campaign. Nudity does play a factor in certain sections of the campaigns as well. Despite the fact that there are only 5 female characters in the game, 4 of them are at least partially naked, and 1 is completely naked at one time or another. Sherry Birkin, one of the main characters, is naked after being kidnapped and held in a science lab. Ada Wong emerges from a submarine completely naked for no reason, and her monstrous doppelganger emerges from a chrysalis naked, which is shown in a brief, somewhat fuzzy cutscene. But the most obvious is a character named Deborah, a sister of a main character. After being found in a cave wearing nothing but a nightie, Deborah eventually bursts into flames and becomes a monstrous version of herself. This monstrous version is completely naked and doesn't try to hide it. She's missing nipples and any lower parts, making her look a little more like a flexible and realistic Barbie doll. But the general idea is definitely there and flaunted in sections. The biggest issue I have with the nudity isn't just that these characters are often naked for no reason, but that male characters, who are often in exactly the same situation, are only ever naked from the waist up. Male characters emerge from the same chrysalises and from the same lab, and yet are always at least wearing pants. I'm not necessarily against the nudity when it happens, but there has to be a story-based explanation for the nudity, and it cannot discriminate based on gender, otherwise it just comes off as a blatant attempt to sneak in boobs. Resident Evil 6 leaves a lot to be desired in many ways. Because of the violence and the nudity, we gave this game a recommended age of 18 years old. For the full written review, including the extra categories, log on to site storygames.com.